Picture a courtroom not modern, not anything you'd recognize. This is roughly 3,500 years ago, somewhere in what's now Iraq, and the defendant is a slave. His crime? He shaved his beard, without permission. And under the law of his time, the punishment for that could be brutal enough that a modern person would have a hard time believing how seriously ancient societies took the hair on a man's face. This wasn't about hygiene, it wasn't about looking good, it was about power, law, status, coded directly into hair follicles. And if you think shaving is some 20th century invention, something dreamed up by a marketing department so they could sell you 5 blades for the price of one, I have bad news for you. This story is older than the wheel, older than writing, possibly older than the very idea of civilization, as we understand it. Today, we're going to figure out why humans started ripping hair off their own bodies in the first place, what they used to do it, and why the exact same basic impulse, grab something sharp, drag it across your own skin, connects a mammoth hunter, an Egyptian priest, a Roman legionary, and you, standing in front of your bathroom mirror this morning. Let's go. So let's pull this all together: stone razors, shell scrapers, shell tweezers, copper blades, bronze blades, honey-based waxing, ritual shaving, battlefield shaving, status razors so personal they were buried with their owners, because a tool used to shape your own face was considered intimate enough to take into the afterlife. And all of it points to one slightly uncomfortable, genuinely fascinating fact: grooming isn't a modern luxury. It wasn't invented by an advertising department or a beauty conglomerate. The urge to grab something sharp and reshape the hair on your own body might be one of the oldest impulses our species has, older than agriculture, older than cities, possibly older than language as we know it. And when you shaved this morning, plucked an eyebrow, or got a wax, without any drama at all, you repeated a ritual whose actual beginning we can't even fully see, buried somewhere in the depth of time. The technology has changed beyond recognition, the impulse hasn't moved an inch. But we still haven't answered the question we opened with, the slave, and his beard, because this story was never really about hygiene, it's about how a simple gesture on a person's face could become law, punishment, and a tool of power for an entire civilization. And that might just be a video of its own. For now, thanks for watching. If this trip from seashell to razor blade was worth your time, hit like, and I'll see you in the next one. And here's a thought that almost never comes up in conversations about shaving, but I think it's genuinely the deepest part of this whole story. When a face is buried under hair, it's also partially hidden emotionally. Expression, age, health are all partly masked. Strip the hair away, and suddenly the face becomes readable, like text. You expose the jawline, the cheekbones, the entire architecture of the skull. You turn the face into a communication tool with a whole new level of precision. Some researchers studying primate social behavior connect grooming and hair removal to a deeper need, common to species that rely heavily on facial recognition, to broadcast their state to everyone around them. We are a species genuinely obsessed with each other's faces. And maybe shaving was one of the earliest ways humans figured out how to turn the face into a billboard, a surface announcing exactly who you are. Let's pause and actually appreciate how insane the entire concept of shaving is when you think about it honestly. You take the sharpest object you own, and you drag it across the most sensitive, blood vessel-packed skin on your entire body. One wrong move, and you're bleeding, and a deep cut, in a world with no antibiotics, could get infected, and an infection could kill you. So the first people who ever attempted this were taking a real risk, not a metaphorical one, an actual, physical, sometimes fatal risk. And people don't risk their health over trivial things, they risk it for what actually matters: food, safety, belonging to the group, attracting a partner. Shaving somehow managed to touch every single item on that list at once. A clean face could signal health, freedom from parasites, attractiveness. It could signal that you belonged to the tribe, followed its rules, deserved its protection. It could signal status, power, respect. All of that, compressed into one simple motion, something sharp, dragged across your own skin. Jump forward to Rome. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder mentioned that professional barbers arrived in Rome around the 3rd century BC, brought over from Sicily. Before that, Romans mostly didn't shave at all, and the general Scipio Africanus, according to legend, was one of the first Romans to start shaving every single day. From that point on, daily shaving became a full-blown Roman institution. Barbershops, tonsures, popped up everywhere, and fasts became less about shaving and more about gossip, news, and conversation, essentially, the ancient Roman version of a group chat. And here's the genuinely interesting part. In Rome and Greece, attitudes toward the beard swung wildly depending on the era and whatever the ruling class found fashionable. Sometimes a clean-shaven face meant civilization, discipline, self-control, and a scruffy beard meant barbarian, or a man who's given up on himself. In other periods, it flipped completely, and a full beard became a symbol of philosophical wisdom. Facial fashion shifted as fast as clothing trends, except the stakes were higher, because you can't take your face off before bed. In 1991, two hikers in the Alps, on the border between Austria and Italy, stumbled onto a body emerging from a melting glacier. At first, they assumed it was a climbing accident. It turned out to be a man who died roughly 5,300 years ago, perfectly preserved by the ice. They named him Otzi, the Ice Man, and he's one of the most studied human remains in the history of archaeology. We know what he ate before he died, we know he had tattoos, we know he was killed, an arrowhead was lodged in his shoulder, and we know, from the condition of his hair and beard, that they'd been kept relatively short. This is not the wild, untouched by civilization caveman from cartoon versions of the Stone Age. This is a groomed Copper Age man who was somehow managing his own facial hair 5,000 years ago, in the mountains, with Copper Age tools. Now to the richest chapter in this entire story, ancient Egypt, where shaving stopped being about comfort and became the coordinate system for the entire society. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Egyptian priests shaved their entire bodies every few days, not just the face, everything. Why? Ritual purity. For Egyptians, body hair was associated with the unclean, the animal, something to put distance between yourself and before you stood in front of the gods. And this wasn't only about priests. High-status people of any gender removed body hair as a marker of refinement and rank. They had copper, and later bronze, razors, some of which survive today, sitting in museum cases. They had pumice stones for exfoliation. They had early sugar and honey-based waxing techniques, the direct ancestor of something you can book at a salon this afternoon. A procedure invented on the banks of the Nile, still alive 4,000 years later. But here's a detail that gets less airtime. Shaving in ancient Egypt wasn't purely a personal choice. It was woven into the social hierarchy so deeply that historians still argue about how ordinary laborers, people with no access to metal tools, actually handled this. Maybe traveling barbers, maybe alternative tools made from cheaper materials. There's no clean answer, and that's a genuinely open, unresolved question in archaeology today. Now go back to the slave from the opening of this video. In certain ancient Mesopotamian legal codes, the right to wear, or not wear, a beard, the right to shave your own head, was written directly into law and tied to your social status. A beard could be the privilege of a free person. Its presence or absence was a marker everyone around you could read instantly, the way a sharp suit or a face tattoo reads instantly today. Changing that marker without permission wasn't a grooming decision, it was a violation of the entire social order. Hair, as legal documentation, sit with that for a second. Okay, parasites make sense as a motive, but there's a second reason, and it's a lot darker. It's about violence. A beard is a handle. In close combat, a solid grip on someone's beard means total control of their head, and that head is usually heading straight towards something sharp. There's a famous story, not fully verified by historians, but widely repeated, that Alexander the Great ordered his soldiers to shave before battle for exactly this reason. A beard is too easy to grab. Whether that specific account is accurate is genuinely debated among historians, but the underlying logic shows up across totally unrelated cultures. A clean face is one less thing an enemy can grab onto while trying to kill you. Military hygiene, essentially. Now, my favorite part of this whole story, because it shows exactly how resourceful people can be when they technically have nothing. Coastal communities in the ancient world loved seafood. Shellfish were easy targets, protein, fat, zero hunting required. Just walk the shoreline at low tide and pick up dinner. And when you crack a shellfish open, you're left holding two hard halves with an unexpectedly sharp edge. Not obsidian sharp, but sharp enough. And here's the connection that should stop you for a second. People who were already eating shellfish constantly were surrounded by a free, renewable, disposable shaving tool. No mining required, no hours spent napping stone. You ate lunch, and lunch handed you a razor on its way out. But that's not even the best part. Shell halves weren't just used as scrapers. They were used as tweezers, two halves pressed together to pinch a single hair and rip it out by the root. Stop and actually picture that. If you've got a metal tweezer sitting in your bathroom right now, you're holding a tool whose entire function was already solved by ancient people using a mollusk. The principle is identical. Two opposing edges, squeeze, pull. We just swapped the seashell for steel. Let's not start with tools. Let's start with why any of this needed to happen. And the answer is so unglamorous that the prestige documentaries usually skip right past it. Lice. Seriously, a thick beard, a thick coat of body hair, in a world with no soap, no hot showers, no chemical weaponry against parasites, that's not a fashion statement, that's prime real estate, a high-rise apartment complex for creatures that bite you, spread disease, and turn your entire existence into one long itch. And this wasn't a minor inconvenience. For most of human history, parasite-borne disease actually killed people, so the first person who picked up something sharp and started scraping it across their own face almost certainly wasn't thinking about looking handsome. He was thinking about making the itching stop. Here's the fun contradiction buried in this. We like to imagine beards as purely practical, a free scarf, built-in insulation against an ice age winter, and that's true. Giving that up in a cold climate is not an obvious move, it's almost an act of defiance against your own biology. But sometimes the war against itching and infection wins out over the war against the cold. People chose the lesser evil. And that's where it gets interesting, because to scrape your face clean, you need a tool, and before humanity had metal, it had something better than you'd expect. Let's not start with tools, let's start with why any of this needed to happen. And the answer is so unglamorous that the prestige documentaries usually skip right past it. Lice. Seriously, a thick beard, a thick coat of body hair, in a world with no soap, no hot showers, no chemical weaponry against parasites, that's not a fashion statement, that's prime real estate, a high-rise apartment complex for creatures that bite you, spread disease, and turn your entire existence into one long itch. And this wasn't a minor inconvenience. For most of human history, parasite-borne disease actually killed people, so the first person who picked up something sharp and started scraping it across their own face almost certainly wasn't thinking about looking handsome. He was thinking about making the itching stop. Here's the fun contradiction buried in this. We like to imagine beards as purely practical, a free scarf, built-in insulation against an ice age winter, and that's true. Giving that up in a cold climate is not an obvious move, it's almost an act of defiance against your own biology. But sometimes the war against itching and infection wins out over the war against the cold. People chose the lesser evil. And that's where it gets interesting, because to scrape your face clean, you need a tool, and before humanity had metal, it had something better than you'd expect.